My name is Samantha Overton, and I'm 33 years old. I hadn't seen my grandfather in almost 4 months. Not because I didn't love him, but because life has a way of swallowing up the days until suddenly a whole season has slipped by. That Saturday afternoon, I decided enough was enough. I packed a small bag of groceries, the kind he liked, canned soup, the strong coffee he refused to give up despite his doctor's warnings, a loaf of rye bread from the bakery on 5th, and drove the 40 minutes to his house on Larchmont Avenue without calling ahead. I wanted to surprise him. I wanted to see his face light up the way it always did when I showed up out of nowhere, the way he'd throw his arms wide and say, "Well, look what the wind blew in." The drive felt ordinary. The sky was overcast, threatening rain the way autumn skies do, and I remember thinking about nothing more important than whether he'd have milk for coffee, or whether I should stop and grab some. When I pulled into his driveway, the porch light was already on, even though it was barely 4 in the afternoon. That struck me as odd, but I didn't dwell on it. Grandpa had always been a little eccentric about lights, keeping them on at strange hours, a habit left over from his years working night shifts decades ago. I climbed the porch steps and knocked twice, the same rhythm I'd used since I was a little girl. For a long moment, nothing happened. No footsteps, no shuffling, none of the usual sounds of him making his way to the door. I knocked again, softer this time, and pressed my ear close, listening. Then I heard it, the click of the deadbolt turning slowly, carefully, like someone trying not to make noise. The door opened only a few inches at first, just enough for one eye to appear in the gap. My grandfather's face, when it came into view, wasn't wearing the smile I expected. His skin looked pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wide with something I'd never seen on him before. Not confusion, not surprise at finding me there. Fear. "Grandpa," I said, my voice catching. "It's me. It's Samantha." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced past me, over my shoulder, scanning the street behind me like he was checking for someone. Then he pulled the door open just wide enough for me to slip through, grabbed my wrist, his grip tighter than I thought his old hands could manage, and whispered, "Get inside, quickly." I stumbled over the threshold, my grocery bag nearly slipping from my arm, and he shut the door fast behind me, sliding the deadbolt back into place with a hard click. The house was dim, curtains drawn tight over every window I could see, which was unlike him. Grandpa loved sunlight. He always said a house without light in it was a house that had given up. "What's going on?" I asked, setting the bag down on the entryway table. "You're scaring me." He pressed a finger to his lips, shook his head, and motioned for me to follow him into the living room, away from the windows. His hands were trembling slightly, something I'd never noticed before, not even after his hip surgery 2 years ago, when the pain had been at its worst. "Hide, right now," he said, his voice barely above a breath. "Just for a minute, please." I didn't understand. I wanted to ask what was happening, who he thought might be coming, why the porch light was burning in daylight, and the curtains were drawn like a storm was rolling in. But something in his face stopped the questions in my throat. Some old instinct passed down through blood that told me this wasn't a moment for explanations. It was a moment for trust. He guided me toward the hallway closet near the base of the stairs, the one that still smelled faintly of mothballs and my grandmother's old wool coats, even though she'd been gone 6 years. I stepped inside without protest, and he pulled the door nearly shut, leaving just a sliver of space for a thread of light. Through the gap, I watched him smooth his shirt, run a hand through his thinning white hair, and take a slow breath, like a man bracing himself for a performance. He walked back toward the front of the house, and for a moment everything went silent except the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the front lock, a sound so familiar it sent a jolt of recognition straight through my chest before my mind had even caught up. I knew that sound. I'd heard it 1,000 times growing up. Every time I came home from school, every time she returned from work, the door would creak open and footsteps would cross the threshold onto the hardwood floor, careful, measured steps, the kind that belonged to someone who thought they were alone. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows of the closet, my pulse hammering, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. I heard my mother walk in. I stayed frozen behind the closet door, my eye pressed to the sliver of light, watching my mother move through my grandfather's living room like she owned every inch of it. She wore a long black coat I didn't recognize, her hair pulled back tight, and there was something in the way she carried herself that felt wrong, calculated. Nothing like the woman who used to sing off-key while doing the dishes when I was a kid. She hadn't spoken to either of us in almost 2 years, not since the falling out over my grandmother's estate, the one where she accused my grandfather of hiding money that never existed and stormed out of his life like she'd never been part of it. "Dad," she said, her voice sharp and clipped, "I know you're here. Your car's in the driveway." My grandfather stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, his posture straighter than I'd seen it in years. Whatever fear had gripped him at the front door had hardened into something else entirely, something steady and resolved. "What do you want, Diane?" he asked, his voice carrying none of the tremor from before. "I want what's mine," she said. "The house, the accounts. You promised me after Mom died that everything would be split fairly, and instead you've been quietly moving things around, cutting me out. I talked to a lawyer. I know what you did with the Fairbanks property." I felt my stomach drop. I had no idea what she was talking about, no idea there was a property at all, but the venom in her voice told me this had been building for a long time, festering out of sight while the rest of the family assumed silence meant peace. "I gave you every chance to make things right," my grandfather said. "You chose to disappear instead. You chose to let your daughter grow up wondering some days whether her mother cared if she lived or died. Don't stand in my house and talk to me about what's fair." My mother's jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might turn and walk out, the way she always used to when confronted with anything uncomfortable. Instead, she took a step closer, and that was when I noticed her hand was clenched tight around something small and metallic that caught the dim light for just a second before disappearing back into her coat pocket. My chest tightened. I didn't know what it was, but the way my grandfather's eyes flicked toward it told me he'd seen it too, and that he understood exactly what it meant. "I'm not leaving without answers," she said, her voice dropping into something quieter, more dangerous than the anger before it. "Then you'll be standing there a long time," he answered, refusing to move. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was watching my grandfather stand there alone, an old man facing down someone who used to be his whole world. Or maybe it was some instinct I didn't fully understand until I was already moving. I pushed the closet door open and stepped into the living room, my legs shaking beneath me. "Mom," I said. She spun around, and for the briefest second I saw something crack across her face, something that looked almost like the woman I remembered from before everything fell apart. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold, unreadable mask. "Samantha, you shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice came out. "Not like this. Not sneaking around. Not showing up with your hand wrapped around something you don't want us to see." Her eyes widened slightly, and I watched her fingers loosen inside her pocket, though she still didn't pull her hand free. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, counting seconds that felt like they stretched into hours. "I never wanted it to be like this," she finally said, her voice cracking just slightly. "I just needed to know the truth. I needed something to make sense again." "Then ask," my grandfather said, his tone softening for the first time since she'd walked through the door. "Ask me instead of coming here with threats hidden in your pocket. I never hid anything from you, Diane. I protected it for Samantha because I didn't trust you not to disappear with it the way you disappeared from her life." My mother's shoulders sagged, and slowly she pulled her hand from her pocket. It wasn't a weapon at all, just an old key, tarnished and small, one she must have kept for years without ever using it. She set it down on the side table like it weighed far more than its size suggested, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she looked less like a stranger and more like someone who had simply lost her way. We stood there, the three of us, in a house that suddenly felt less like a place of danger and more like the beginning of something none of us had expected. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left open, however slightly, and after 2 years of silence, that was more than I'd ever thought we'd have.